this is a few weeks of spring practice. I don't think any of us, well, I know Josh isn't. Josh will never do this, make a huge proclamation or overreact to the spring news. But at this point, between players and coaches and media availability that we've had, some folks that we've had at practice sharing intel with us and the intel Josh has gathered, some names have kind of come to the front of the train, if you will.
Yep.
And it's fair to just talk about what we've been hearing and what we think that means moving forward. Obviously, there are plenty of hype train passengers that have not translated into the season, but hey, this is where we are. This is what we're going to talk about with football. So let's start with the offense. We've been talking about quarterback a ton, obviously. Okay. We will continue to talk about quarterback a ton. It's going to be a storyline until it's not. And then even then in the season, it's still going to linger. But I think we could say a little bit about every quarterback. I think Davis Warren has shown folks that he was injured last year. The shoulder's feeling better. He's done better in camp than people expected. Jaden Davis, as a freshman, has impressed some folks. The thing he is dealing with is the thing we expected. We talked about that when he committed. Some mechanics issues. He's got a really long, delivery. Maybe that's impacting him. Okay. Jaden Denegal has had some good days, some tough days like everyone else. Yeah. Haven't really seen him rise up, so to speak. And Jack Tuttle hasn't been contributing. He's dealing with an injury, so he's kind of lingering there and hasn't been able to make a statement. Mm-hmm. Alex Orji is the name we hear the most. And in the same category as the Denegals and the Davis Warren and Jaden Davis. He's had good days, he's had bad. Josh has shared that. But he is just the name that just keeps coming up the most. The staff, the way they talk about him, right? And then even the players, the way they talk about him as well. It feels like, again, without Tuttle, it's kind of tough to say, but it just continues to feel like Alex Orji is the guy that they're wanting to go take this job. He hasn't yet. He won't, right? This is going to linger for a little bit. Yeah. But out of the group, he continues to be the name we hear the most in terms of hype. And again, it's not full-blooded. There is some, hey, he's got to work on this and that. But if you want to break into Orji a little bit or whatever else you think about the other quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think the one thing right now from anyone that I'm getting spring practice intel from is that this thing is nowhere close to being decided. Yeah. Nowhere near figuring this thing out. And yeah, probably Orji has the most hype right now because he was the guy that Michigan trotted out in some pretty big time situations outside of JJ McCarthy. So, rightfully so, he probably does have most of the hype. I haven't heard anything specific that says that he's just outshining the rest. I think that unless they, and this is hypothetical, unless they dip into the portal, that he might be the guy that just kind of just rides it out and wins it out at the end. But you're right. Everyone's had their ups and downs. I think, from a stability standpoint, I think Alex Orji's been the most, leveled. I wouldn't say consistent because he's had his fair share of inconsistencies as well. But I think he's had less of them, compared to a Denegal and Davis Warren and Jaden Davis as well. So, we'll kind of see. It's still very early. Again, and as you said, I'm not going to make any proclamations. I mean, is it probably if Michigan doesn't find a slam dunk in the portal, is it going to be Alex Orji? Probably, yeah, it probably will be. But I think they would like Orji to take the starting role, honestly. And I think a lot of people would like to see that as well. But I think a lot more has to happen in order for them to get that level of comfort right now. A lot more consistency from, not just Orji, but everyone else as well. Jaden Davis has had good days too. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not like he's just floundering. I mean, he's had his ups and downs. He makes a lot of freshman mistakes, which is to be expected. Do I predict him stealing playing time? Probably not right now. I think he's probably a year out. Will he see the field at all this year in backup roles? I don't know. I don't know. I just think at the end of the day, I think it comes down to whatever Sharon and Kirk Campbell feel comfortable with the most leading this offense, who can not create turnovers, and most importantly, who can lead scoring drives. So, you've seen a little bit of both. I know it's been discussed the last couple of practices that has been pretty even amongst the offense and defense, which wasn't exactly that way the last couple of weeks. I mean, you've seen, I heard primarily the defense was having much better days than the offense, but that's usually always the case when, a spring starts up and a fall starts up. And then there's a little bit of lag period for the offense to start catching up. And I think now you're starting to see that. So, I think Michigan will be fine getting through spring without having a clear number one guy, and it's not going to be decided in the spring unless Alex Orji is just turned, or anyone really turns into this just mythical quarterback that just doesn't make any mistakes. I mean, you have a lot of time, and I don't think they're in a rush. They don't need to be in a rush. Take as much time as you need. I mean, hell, they could decide an hour before kickoff if they wanted to, so it's still evolving. It's going, it's going, it's a developing type of thing. I'll be curious to see how this develops over the next couple of weeks or so. I know that there was some interception issues with a lot of the quarterbacks, which I don't know if that speaks to just the bad quarterback play or good defensive back play. I think, it's probably a little in the middle, somewhere in the middle of that. But again, I'm just so not concerned with the quarterback play right now. Especially in spring, the portal is coming quick. I think it's the 16th. Actually, I think we were saying it wrong. It's the 16th, but either way, it's the 15th, 16th. That's coming up pretty quickly here. So we should get a good look at, if there's any surprise names that enter. I would not be surprised if Michigan gets involved. So, we just I'm not in a rush. Again, I'm not going to make any major proclamations. I'm not even going to say anyone's in the lead because I don't think there is. I've been told so many times that this thing is even deadlocked back and forth and no one's really emerged yet. Do I think that's a bad thing? No, I don't. I mean, you obviously want a guy, but if this was August and we're talking about no one has emerged or things are even, then I'd be a little concerned. But April, there's so much time, and now the offensive staff is together and can gel and finally move forward. I think you'll start to see things evolve moving forward, and again, Michigan can address multiple positions on offense through the portal. I mean, they probably should add a receiver or two into the mix, and that can change the face of an offense too. So there's just a lot of variables out there to really kind of, to make a long-winded response short here. A lot of variables.
Too late, brother.
Yeah, a lot of variables that still need to happen in order for me to be declaring a starting quarterback during spring.
Yeah, I continue to say though, and Kirk Campbell said this, and I think it stuck out to me about being the starting quarterback and everything that goes into it. And it's not just, how they're doing in drills. It's about how they carry themselves, everything else. And I mean, Orji is just consistently front and center with everything, whether it's the pictures, the social media stuff, the interactions with players. He's the guy other players bring up. So look, whether he's going to take the job or not, we don't know. And without Tuttle there, it's interesting, but he's just constantly out front. Mm-hmm. It's just the name that's being feasted. So yeah, he's got to win it. That's what it comes down to. And again, without Tuttle there, who continues to feel like the high floor guy. But I was going to pick a running back, but I don't think I can anymore because they've all kind of had different levels of hype. So we know how much Donovan Edwards is bulked up and what's been said about his resurgence and rejuvenation and where he's at mentally and taking on a leadership role. Kalel Mullings is the opposite. Sounds like he's actually thinned out a little bit. Not shocking. This was a guy whose initial weight program was to be a linebacker at Michigan. He's still going to be a big boy, right? Yeah. him standing. I still remember after the Nebraska game, Mullings and Stewart were next to each other, and I'm like, this is an edge and a running back, and they look identical. This is crazy, right? So, but yeah, Mullings kind of adapting his role. We heard them talk about Thunder and Lightning, and a guy that got a lot of hype last spring with his opportunities as well, and then dealt with some injuries in the season. We were hearing a lot of good things about Ben Hall, and then today, Blake Corum, during an interview at the Tigers game, specifically called out Hall. One, he said, gave props to Donovan, saying he's going to have a big year, but he called out Ben Hall and specifically said he reminds me of me. So, we've heard that before in terms of the shiftiness and the cuts and the vision. Not saying Ben Hall is about ready to replace the greatest running back in Michigan football history, but when Blake Corum says, hey, that guy's going to have a good year, he reminds me a lot of me. I think that's high praise. So, look, we know Michigan likes to run the ball. We know what that means, but it sounds like a very, very solid three is forming with Mullings, Edwards, and potentially Hall in that other spot.
Yeah, that's kind of what we expected, and really, that's not the first time that we've heard that Hall has been compared to Blake either. They're both kind of shorter backs in stature, but kind of thick-bodied guys that can, either run through you or run around you. So I'll be really curious to see what Hall's development looks like under Tony Alford. He's an intriguing back, and I know I personally was kind of down on the signing because you didn't really, it felt a lot like it was a reach signing because you're talking about a third stringer on Buford that didn't really play much. But, again, that just goes to show that, scouting is top notch. And if you can find guys that, you can develop. And so far, in very limited showings, Hall has made some impressive plays. And now with, a bigger role this year, you might be able to see much more out of Hall. But yeah, just from a look standpoint, I mean, Donovan Edwards looks huge. I mean, he is noticeably put on.
So yeah, you can see
muscle.
it.
Yeah, which is good for him because I think one of the major knocks on him is kind of going down at the first tackle. Being able to, that first contact being going down and being thick enough to kind of absorb that will change his game monumentally. I mean, that'll take his game to a whole new level if he's able to get through the first tackle and still maintain that speed and that shiftiness that he's been able to show. That's
an extra yard or two.
Yeah, that'll be a game changer for him. And that was probably that would have been the game changer for him this year outside of the obvious Penn State games and the Washington games. The extra yard or two or three on his runs, you probably would have had a lot different opinions on his year if he were able to get those. So obviously you want to see him, be this vision too is also another thing. But yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Blake. I think he's going to be in for a big year. And I think Kalel is not going to be too far behind him too. He told reporters this week, we were there on, I think it was Monday or Wednesday, one of the two. He mentioned that, he doesn't just want to be a short yardage back. He wants to show that he's capable of, ripping off longer runs or being in situations where, it's not necessarily third and short, second and short yardage situations. So, I'll be perfectly fine with that. If they have two guys that are capable of ripping off long runs and not specific short yardage backs, that's fine. That's great for Michigan. I mean, they'll still be great. So, yeah, I'm really intrigued with the running back group this year. I think that trio, if they can stay healthy, I think they'll be really productive this year and giving, Ben Hall a bigger role, I think will do really well for him. And obviously, if things, I mean, we're not even talking about, guys like Jordan Marshall or Micah Capana are not even on campus yet. Who could be in the mix too. I mean, I think Marshall probably would be more in the mix just because I think he's the most college ready guy out of the two right now, but we'll see if that happens. But yeah, I mean, they've got guys, they've got bodies, and we just have to see them and see how it plays out. But if Donovan is going to do Donovan things and continue an upward trajectory, I mean, he's going to command most of the snaps. So it's kind of up to those other guys to seize the situation when they have those, situational type of carries.
I continue to think, and we'll see how it plays out, but at some point in the season, whether it's earlier on or as the season goes on, I think Mullings is going to be arguably the RB1. I really do. I think he's going to end up with more carries. It's not going to be a significant gap, but I think we're going to see both of those guys on the field at the same time a lot. Look, Donovan had plus 30 plus targets, 30 receptions last year, and we felt like they didn't use him in the passing game enough, right? That was mostly short yardage. They just didn't let him go deep. I think with maybe some of the help the wide receivers might need, Edwards is arguably already wide receiver 3 on this team, right? So I think you could see him used differently. He's going to get carries. But I think Mullings, when you talk about short yardage, what was so crucial to Michigan's success is staying on schedule. The 2nd and 5, the 3rd and 2, right? And Mullings, we've said this a bunch. He gets 5 yards a carry, not on average. He gets 5 yards a carry, right? So right. I think he can add, like he said, that extra element, but the Hassan Haskins comparisons are just too obvious.
Yeah, I agree.
And somebody else brought out, he had a reception against Penn State. I think Bama, he had one too, and he was dealing with a hand injury most of the year.
Yeah.
So a fully healthy Mullings could have more dynamics than we realize as well. But yeah, Ben Hall, Steve said this. I don't want to say running back coach is overrated. That's not it at all. I do think there's just something to natural ability when it comes to a running back, whether it's a speed thing or the ability to cut, vision. Like there's definitely things to be coached. There's some stuff that running backs just do that you can't coach, and guys either have it or they don't.
Yep.
And that's why Jordan Marshall feels like the freshman that could contribute.
Yep.
There's just something to the way he runs. So.
Well, and I think Michigan learned their lesson too from, the year that they ran Blake like 35 carries a game. I think they need to, they realized that, I wouldn't say they messed up, because he earned every carry and should have won the Heisman that year too, if not for the knee injury. But I think they kind of learned their lesson that they need depth and need to be cognizant of the type of reps they're handing out. They don't want to overuse the guy if you've got another guy that can, give you as much or maybe more in certain situations. So I think that goes into it too. Building that depth that they can rely on, and giving a guy, not giving a guy 30, 35 carries a game. That adds up. It adds wear on the tires. And we eventually saw that with Blake towards the end of the year. It was an unfortunate hit, but but you're talking about him running 30 carries a game. It's just,
and we saw the best version of Blake Corum at the back half of the season.
Yep.
Especially they get the bye week and then the time off going into the playoff, and it just felt like he had a little bit more towards the end.
It preserves guys. It makes them, you saw, as you said, you saw last year, healthy Blake, healthy Donovan, and you saw what they were able to do in certain situations. And that's huge. I don't want to say that Donovan was he just got bit by the injury bug a couple of times during the early part of his career, which is unfortunate. And I think it held him back a bit, but with the way Michigan used their backs and were able to shuffle guys in and out, that preserved Donovan. And now you're able to see what a healthy and locked in Donovan Edwards looks like. And now you're obviously hoping to replicate that for a full year and not just in a window of time in 2 different ball games. Although huge moments in huge games, but you obviously want to see that extended out for an entire season.
All right, we are going to be here till the morning if we don't pick it up a little bit. So let's try it. Some of these are going to be obvious. Here's an obvious one, Colston Loveland. Look, we've talked about already. He might be wide receiver 1 technically by the end of this, just because he's the big target. Marlon Klein is somebody I think we could put in this spot as well if we're looking for a not so obvious answer. He's really locked into that tight end 2 role. Bredesen is arguably taking on a bigger role beyond fullback. Maybe he gets some carries. Maybe he gets some receptions. But Loveland is just blowing people away. He's taken another leap, it sounds like, going into the junior year. he's gonna be the best tight end in college football. It's just there. But he's gone from this impressive athlete, which they've said they think Klein might be a better athlete, which is insane to think about.
Mm-hmm.
But there's just a different command Colston Loveland has in camp this year.
Yeah, no, he's been incredibly impressive. I think Michigan fans should enjoy him while you have him, because I do not expect him here much longer after this season. So we'll kind of see. I think the big thing for Michigan in the tight end room right now, obviously Loveland is going to do Loveland things. They're hoping Marlon Klein kind of steps up a little bit. They have guys like Max Bredesen and Josh Beetham that they really like. Josh Beetham is a walk-on that's really just put in the work, and has really kind of pushed his way up into kind of his specialized role, kind of like what Max Bredesen is right now, kind of like that blocker, just a tough kid that, is willing to put his helmet in wherever he needs to be. And yeah. And I think the big thing right now is the depth behind them. They want to see that develop. I know Zach Marshall's kind of been a little behind in terms of his development, has struggled in places. Tony Ellie, the same thing. Prescorn and Hogan Hansen. Both of those guys are just freshmen. They're just they're just adjusting to college ball. So it's going to take them a little time. I'm personally excited about Prescorn. They need a little more time and seasoning in order for them to be fully trusted. So ideally, I think the big thing with the tight end room right now is the back end. They want to see kind of step it up a little bit and develop. I don't think they're concerned by any means, but when you've got guys like Loveland there, he's going to command 95% of the snaps. So it'd be nice to have some guys to spell them out for a bit. But I think the big takeaway for me, obviously, is that Colston Loveland is Colston Loveland, but they're hoping that some back end guys can kind of take a step forward here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and Steve asked about that specifically. Deacon Tonelli is a guy that could find a spot kind of backing up Marlon Klein in that inline blocking role. Look, if the opportunity is there, we saw Colston Loveland as a freshman start to play at the end of the year, and then by Ohio State and Purdue Big Ten championship game, he's like one of the top targets out there. Mm-hmm. Some of that had to deal with injuries and him being thrown into that spot. So you hope that's not the reason. I'm excited about both Prescorn and Hansen because I feel like everybody's picked one. Whoever you ask, there's a guy that really likes Brady and there's a guy that really likes Hogan. That's not saying one bad thing about the other, but it's just interesting how each of them have kind of earned their favorites throughout. But the one thing they have going for them is all of them are going to get to play and learn from Colston Loveland.
Yeah.
So I just continue to be impressed by the dude. And I think when I talked to Jake Budd about him and he said he was already better than him physically as a sophomore, that just really, since then, man, I've just been all in. I think the dude's going to have a legendary Michigan season. So I probably could have put a bunch of offensive linemen here, but again, we would have spent the whole show talking about offensive linemen that have made some noise this offseason. The one I really want to draw attention to is a guy I think could be a captain heading into the season this year, and that's Greg Crippen. Yep. A lot of people know his story. He thought he was competing for a starting job 2 years ago. They bring in Olu. He stays at Michigan, learns from Olu, ready to go every week, learning from him. Coming to last year, probably feels like he's going to be the starter. They bring in Drake Nugent, who was injured through a lot of spring and even into summer. And Greg Crippen played like the starting center. And a lot of folks will tell you it went to like the last week or two of fall camp where they would have been comfortable putting Crippen out there over Nugent, right? And Olu and Nugent are two guys that were if not the best center, definitely up there as the best centers in college football each year they played. So Crippen has stayed. He's waited his turn. Again, back to just talking about the thing with Orgy and the way they carry themselves and seeing how present they are with some of the other big name players. Greg Crippen is ready to take advantage of this opportunity. He is, cliche or not, everybody keeps saying it, so I'm going to say it. He's one of those first guy in the room, last guy to leave situations. He's always watching film. You keep hearing the same things about him. I think with all new starters on the offensive line, having a guy like Crippen, who is the culture piece that you want. He stayed, he's waited his turn. He's learned from two of the best centers in the last few years. He's got that high football IQ. He just seems really ready to run with this opportunity and be a very, very valuable piece to this offense.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you want to throw out more cliches, he's kind of the quintessential those who stay kind of guys, right?
He is. Yeah.
Like, I know it's kind of corny or whatever, but I mean, it's true. He stayed, he's a champion, he's a national champion, and now he has a chance to carry on the tradition and you know, and it looks like he could slot in seamlessly and just and do his job. And I think that's just kind of what Michigan has always wanted with their offensive lines, is just guys that, you know, are just about the team, about developing and getting in there, doing their jobs and getting out of there and going to the league. You know, that's kind of what, you know, it's happened with Olu. It's probably going to happen with Nugent. And, you know, Crippen certainly he's got the looks of a guy that could be an NFL pro at some point. And, you know, they certainly talk about him like he has that ability. So, yeah, I mean, if I were to point out one guy on the offensive line outside of like a Josh Breeb, I think he's probably the one consistent name that's been mentioned all spring. So, I mean, good for him for writing this out, and now he's got his moment. I think you can pretty much etch his name in stone as the starting center. And again, I mean, you know, that's just the kind of culture that Michigan's built. You know, a guy that very easily could have transferred even long before, you know, Olu and him competing for the same starting. I mean, just a lot. There's just a lot there that I wouldn't have blamed him if he left. But here we are, you know, a guy that, you know, is going to be your starting center barring something unforeseen. And I think he's earned the praise, and you know, he's put in the work. More importantly, he's put in the work. I mean, yeah, as you said, Grant Newsom was mentioned that they've had to kick him out of the building a couple of times because he's been there for so long watching tape and just always trying to learn and soak up whatever he can. So that's a sign of an encouraging player, someone that, I mean, that reminds me a lot of how people talked about Rod Moore when he first started, a guy that, you know, was just so into film and studied and learned. Hey, don't count him out. Don't count him out just yet. Don't count him out. But yeah, he reminds me a lot of like a Rob Moore type, a guy that really soaks in the film and translates that knowledge to the field. So I've got a really good feeling about Greg Crippen this year, and I think he's going to do good things for sure.
Yeah, I become biased to people, and I'm building a bias to Greg Crippen. I just the things you've heard about him, the fact he's stuck, and I mean, honestly, that whole offensive line room for the last few years, props to Sharon Moore, props to Grant Newsom. Yeah. They brought, I mean, nobody's really left. A couple dudes have, but that was more depth chart than anything. That wasn't frustrated prospect or guy didn't start right away. I mean, even now in the position battle, we've talked about, you know, guys like Jeffrey Percy, Tristan Bounds, who have, I mean, Percy got a start. Bounds hasn't played much. Those are two monster tackles that could have been starting for the last couple of years in a lot of places.
Yep.
You know, and these guys are just, they're obsessed with the Michigan experience. And they've told me, look, if I start 1 year, my 5th year, I'm going to the NFL.
Yeah. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, it's right there. You know, the blueprint is there. Just follow the blueprint and they're going to get you there. I mean, that's not even hyperbole, or I'm not even BSing it. It's literally,
they're going to have 6 offensive linemen this year.
Yeah.
You know, 1 or 2 might be undrafted free agents. We'll have to see how it shakes out. But the fact that there's never been anything like that. 6 offensive linemen in a draft class, all invited to combine and things like that. So, Steve, they brought up Blake Frazier, which is interesting. Yes and no. I mean, this freshman class is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be so good. Him and Jake are the only two that are early enrollees, I believe, off the top of my head. So, look, Garnera could be a starter next year, depending on how things shake out with Crippen or if Anderson stays or how that works out. He's your center. Frazier, it's interesting to me they brought him up at tackle because I've always kind of thought I've copied him to Zach Zinter a lot. He just reminds me of a very athletic guard potentially moving in. Some of that's because he's so lean right now. We'll have to see how his frame fills out because his frame could fill out and he could be a Ryan Hayes too. Hayes was a smaller guy because he was a former tight end. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. But get used to the height from that freshman class. They're all good, man.
Yeah, once fall rolls around, I would not be surprised if you start hearing Sprague's name mentioned too. I mean, those
Sprague's
two guys,
probably the best of the group, and Frazier's right there with him. Yeah,
Sprague and Frazier are your future right there. So yeah, it's not surprising that they're here. I mean,
a lot of people. Oh, it's a good group.
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about Frazier being really exciting. They also talk about how good of a kid he is too. So that's also a good thing. You like hearing that they're not pieces of crap.
We do hear that about some of them.
That sometimes happens. Yeah.
So. There's been an omission already in this show, but that's fine. Hey, your dad's a former national champion at Michigan. You show up and gladly take that 77 jersey. You know what that means.
Yeah, you could show up entitled, but you don't, and that's a good thing. That's a very good mindset.